Welcome, weary travellers and midnight dreamers, to the Keen Sleepless Librarian, where the pages never close and the stories never end. Tonight we step into a world older than time itself, where gods walked among mortals, heroes defied fate, and every whisper on the wind carried a prophecy. Imagine a time when the sky was closer, when the sea hid monsters instead of secrets, and when a single choice, a golden apple, a glance over a shoulder, a thread cut too soon, could unravel kingdoms. This is the world of Greek mythology. A tapestry of love and war, courage and madness, where even the gods were not spared from their own flaws. So light a candle, settle into the shadows, and let your mind wander. Because here, in the quiet hours, the old tales wake again. And tonight we begin where all stories do. The dawn of the gods. Before time began, there was only chaos, a dark, swirling emptiness where nothing lived. From this nothingness came the first beings. Gaia, the earth, rose up broad and strong, covered in mountains and forests. Deep below her formed Tartarus, the underworld, a shadowy place of endless night. Between them appeared Eros, the spirit of love, whose power would one day bring all things together. Gaia lay alone in the emptiness, her vast body stretching beneath endless nothing. Yearning for company, she created Uranus, the starry sky, who arched over her like a great dome. Together they became the parents of the first gods, the mighty Titans. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 brothers and 6 sisters, each with incredible power over the world. The eldest was Oceanus, the great river that circled the earth. His waters touched every shore, connecting all lands. His sister Tethys gave birth to all the rivers and streams that flow upon the earth. Hyperion brought the first light, while his sister Theia made all things shine with radiance. Coeus and Phoebe ruled over knowledge and prophecy, seeing what was yet to come. Creus governed the heavenly constellations, while Iapetus would father children who shaped mankind's fate. Among the sisters were Themis, who kept divine law, and Mnemosyne, who held all memories. But the youngest would change everything. Cronus with his sharp mind, and Rhea, whose gentle strength hid great power. Uranus looked upon his children with fear instead of pride. Their power threatened him, so he pushed them back inside Gaia's body, deep into her dark caves. The weight of them inside her caused terrible pain. Rivers of her tears became the first springs and streams. For ages she endured this suffering, until her sadness turned to anger. From her deepest stone, Gaia formed a great sickle, its blade sharp enough to cut the sky itself. She called her Titan children and asked who would help her. Only Cronus, the youngest and boldest, stepped forward. That night, when Uranus came to rest upon Gaia, Cronus struck out with the sickle, cutting his father apart. From Uranus's blood that fell on the earth sprang 3 terrible kinds of beings: the giants, strong as mountains; the Erinyes, or Furies, who punished broken oaths; and the Meliae, nymphs of the ash trees. Where his flesh fell into the sea, white foam swirled, and from it rose Aphrodite, goddess of love, beautiful and smiling, even as she brought both joy and trouble to gods and men. With Uranus gone, Cronus became king of the Titans. He took his sister Rhea as queen, and for a time there was peace. But as Uranus had fallen, so he had cursed Cronus. "You too shall be overthrown by your own child." This prophecy haunted Cronus. When Rhea bore their first child, Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, Cronus swallowed her whole. Next came Demeter, then Hera, then Hades and Poseidon. Each met the same fate, disappearing into their father's stomach, where they remained alive but trapped. Rhea could not bear this cruelty. When she was pregnant with her sixth child, she went secretly to Gaia for help. As her time came, Rhea crept away to a hidden cave on Mount Ida. There she gave birth to Zeus, and instead of bringing the baby to Cronus, she wrapped a large stone in baby clothes. Cronus, suspecting nothing, swallowed the stone while the real Zeus was spirited away to safety. On the mountain, the nymph Adrastea cared for young Zeus. She fed him honey and the milk of the magical goat Amalthea. The baby grew strong quickly, his laughter shaking the trees. To hide his cries from Cronus, the Curetes, armored dancers, clashed their spears and shields in wild dances that drowned out all other sounds. When Zeus came of age, he visited his father in disguise and tricked him into drinking a special potion. Cronus vomited up first the stone, then all of Zeus's brothers and sisters, now fully grown gods. Together they made war against the Titans in a great battle called the Titanomachy that shook the world for 10 years. Mountains crumbled into the sea. The earth trembled with their fighting. Zeus freed the Cyclopes from Tartarus, and in gratitude they forged his mighty thunderbolt. The 100-handed giants helped by hurling boulders like rain. Finally, Zeus struck the final blow, casting the Titans into Tartarus forever, all except those who had helped him, like Prometheus and Themis. With the war won, the three brothers drew lots to divide the world. Zeus became king of the sky and ruler of the gods. Poseidon took the seas, his trident stirring great waves. Hades received the underworld, where souls go after death. The Olympians made their home on Mount Olympus, where they feasted on ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. But Gaia was not finished. Angry at her children's imprisonment, she birthed one last monster, Typhon, taller than mountains, with 100 dragon heads and eyes that burned like lava. The very earth shook when he moved. Most gods fled in terror, but Zeus stood firm. Their battle set the world aflame until at last Zeus crushed Typhon beneath Mount Aetna, where his fiery breath still escapes in eruptions. Now the age of gods truly began. Zeus ruled from Olympus with Hera by his side. Athena sprang full-grown from his head, goddess of wisdom and war. Apollo brought the sun's light each day, while Artemis roamed the moonlit forests. Hermes flew between worlds as messenger, and Hephaestus forged wonders in his fiery workshop. Demeter made crops grow, Dionysus brought wine and joy, and Aphrodite spread love's sweet pain. Yet the gods were not alone in the world. In the forests lived nymphs among the trees, satyrs danced in wild places, and in distant caves the fates spun their threads, measuring out each life from birth to death. The stage was set for heroes and monsters, for great deeds and terrible tragedies. For though the gods were mighty, they were not always wise, and their choices would shape the lives of mortals in ways no one could foresee. Far below Olympus, on the broad plains of Greece, the first cities were being built. Kings ruled and farmers tilled their fields, unaware of how often their lives would become tangled with the gods above. The age of miracles had begun when gods walked among men and nothing was impossible. But with great power comes great danger, and the stories of those days are filled with both wonder and warning. The first heroes and monsters. The world was young when the gods began shaping the lives of mortals. Though the Olympians ruled from their golden halls on Mount Olympus, the earth below teemed with danger and wonder. Monsters lurked in dark forests, nymphs danced in moonlit groves, and the first great heroes, half god, half mortal, began to carve their names into legend. In those early days, fire belonged only to the gods. Humans shivered in the dark, eating raw meat and hiding in caves from the beasts that prowled the night. Prometheus, the Titan who had helped Zeus win his throne, looked upon them with pity. One night, while the gods feasted on Olympus, he crept into Hephaestus's forge and stole a spark of divine fire, hiding it in a hollow fennel stalk. When he gave it to mankind, everything changed. With fire came warmth, cooked food, and the first forges where metal could be shaped into tools. Villages grew into towns, and people began to dream of more than mere survival. But Zeus, furious at the theft, decided to punish both Prometheus and the humans he loved. The punishment for Prometheus was cruel. Hephaestus bound the Titan to a mountainside with unbreakable chains. Each day a giant eagle tore open his belly and feasted on his liver. Each night the liver grew back, only for the torture to begin again at dawn. Though in agony, Prometheus never begged for mercy. His sacrifice would be remembered for all time. For mankind, Zeus prepared a different punishment. He ordered Hephaestus to shape the first woman from clay, a creature both beautiful and dangerous. Athena dressed her in fine robes, Aphrodite gave her irresistible charm, and Hermes filled her with clever lies. They named her Pandora, meaning all gifted, for each god had given her something. As a final touch, Zeus gave her a sealed jar. "Never open this," he warned, knowing full well she would. Pandora came to earth and married Epimetheus, Prometheus' foolish brother. At first, life was happy, but curiosity gnawed at her until one day, unable to resist, she lifted the jar's lid. Out poured all the evils that plague humanity: sickness, greed, hatred, war. Only one thing remained inside when she slammed the lid shut: hope. As generations passed, mankind grew wicked. Zeus, disgusted by their violence, sent a great flood to wipe them out. Only two would survive: Deucalion, son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha. Warned in advance, they built a wooden chest and floated for 9 days on the endless waters. When the flood finally receded, they stood on a barren mountain, the last people on earth. An oracle told them, "Throw the bones of your mother behind you." At first, they were horrified. How could they disturb their dead mother's remains? But Deucalion understood the riddle. Their mother was the earth itself. So they picked up stones, the bones of Gaia, and tossed them over their shoulders. Where Deucalion's stones landed, men sprang up. Where Pyrrha's landed, women appeared. The world was repopulated, but it would never be as innocent as before. Now the age of heroes truly began. The first was Perseus, son of Zeus and the princess Danae. Her father, King Acrisius, had locked her away in a bronze chamber when a prophecy said her son would kill him. But Zeus, transformed into golden rain, slipped through the cracks and Danae bore a child. Furious, Acrisius cast mother and baby into the sea in a wooden chest. Miraculously, they washed ashore on a distant island, where a kind fisherman raised Perseus as his own. Years later, the island's king, Polydectes, desired Danae and sought to rid himself of her son. "Bring me the head of Medusa," he commanded, knowing the task was impossible. Medusa was a gorgon, a winged monster with snakes for hair. Her gaze turned men to stone, but the gods favored Perseus. Athena gave him a polished shield, Hermes lent him winged sandals, and Hades offered a helm of invisibility. Guided by nymphs, Perseus found the Gorgon's lair. Using the shield as a mirror to avoid Medusa's gaze, he struck off her head. From her bleeding neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden giant. On his journey home, Perseus rescued the princess Andromeda from a sea monster, marrying her and bringing her with him. When he returned to Polydectes' court, the king laughed, until Perseus lifted Medusa's head and turned him to stone. Yet even heroes could not escape fate. Years later, at an athletic contest, Perseus threw a discus that veered wildly and struck an old man in the crowd, his grandfather Acrisius, fulfilling the prophecy at last. Meanwhile, in the city of Thebes, another tragedy was unfolding. King Laius had been warned his son would kill him, so he abandoned the baby on a mountainside. But fate intervened, and that child, Oedipus, would grow up to unknowingly fulfill the prophecy, bringing ruin to his family and his city. The gods watched these events unfold, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering. For though they were powerful, they were not always wise, and their meddling in mortal lives would lead to both greatness and suffering. Far to the north, in the kingdom of Mycenae, a woman named Alcmena prayed for a child. Zeus, moved by her beauty, visited her in the form of her husband. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son unlike any other, a boy who would become the greatest hero of all time. They named him Heracles, meaning glory of Hera, though the queen of gods would become his greatest enemy. But that is a story for another night. The curse of Thebes. The road to Thebes stretched empty under the midday sun, the dust stirring faintly as a lone traveller made his way toward the city gates. This was Oedipus, a prince of Corinth, or so he believed, though the gods knew the terrible truth he carried in his bones. Days earlier at Delphi, the oracle's words had sent him fleeing from home. "You will kill your father and marry your mother." Horrified, he vowed never to return to Corinth, never to look upon King Polybus and Queen Merope, who had raised him. At a place where 3 roads met, his journey took its darkest turn. A chariot came thundering down the narrow path, its driver, an old man with a crown-shaped scar upon his brow, lashing out with his whip. "Out of my way, peasant!" The sting of the blow ignited something primal in Oedipus. He grabbed the whip, pulled the man from his chariot, and struck him dead with his walking staff. The servants fled as Oedipus continued on, unaware he'd just fulfilled the first half of the prophecy. The dead man was Laius, king of Thebes, his true father. Thebes lay under a shadow when Oedipus arrived. A monstrous sphinx crouched upon the city walls, her lion's body tensed to pounce, her woman's face twisted in cruel amusement. For months she devoured anyone who failed to answer her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? The bones of her victims littered the roadside. When Oedipus faced her, the answer came swift as an arrow. Man who crawls as a baby, walks upright in his prime, and leans on a staff in old age. The Sphinx's scream shook the city as she cast herself from the walls. Her reign of terror ended. The people proclaimed Oedipus their saviour. With Laius dead and the throne empty, they crowned him king, and gave him the widowed Queen Jocasta's hand in marriage. For years Thebes prospered. 4 children were born, 2 strong sons and 2 sharp-eyed daughters, and the harvests grew plentiful. Then came the blight. Crops withered in the fields. Women gave birth to stillborn children. Smoke from funeral pyres darkened the sky. The oracle at Delphi revealed the cause. The murderer of Laius walks among you. Oedipus swore to find the killer, unaware he hunted himself. Piece by terrible piece, the truth unravelled. The old shepherd who'd spared a baby's life decades ago. The servant who'd witnessed Laius's murder at the crossroads. Jocasta's anguished cries as she calculated the years. Her husband Laius had died where 3 roads met, just as Oedipus had once slain a stranger. When the final thread snapped, Jocasta ran to her chambers without a word. Oedipus found her hanging from the rafters, her slippers still rocking gently where they'd fallen. With a howl that echoed through the palace, he tore the gold brooches from her robe and plunged them into his eyes. Darkness for the man who saw too much. Blind and broken, he wandered into exile with only his daughter Antigone to guide him. But the curse wasn't finished with Thebes. Oedipus's sons Eteocles and Polynices turned on each other, their war for the throne ending with both dead by each other's hand. Their uncle Creon, now king, decreed Polynices, who had attacked his own city, would remain unburied, his corpse left for dogs and vultures. Antigone, bound by sacred law, defied the order. Under cover of night, she sprinkled dust over her brother's body, performing the funeral rites. When caught, she stood unwavering before Creon. Your laws cannot override the gods. Even as they walled her alive in a stone tomb, she showed no fear. The gods made their displeasure known. Creon's son Haman, who loved Antigone, fell on his sword beside her body. His wife Eurydice soon followed, her suicide leaving Creon alone in his empty palace. The house of Thebes had fallen, not to war or time, but to the weight of its own pride. Yet, as one tragedy ended, another hero was coming of age far to the north. In the city of Tiryns, a muscular youth named Heracles, descendant of Perseus, was about to face his first great test. The gods were stirring again, and the greatest labours of all time would soon begin. The labours of Heracles. The palace walls of Tiryns trembled with the sound of splintering wood. Inside the training grounds, a 16-year-old Heracles stood panting, his hands still gripping the broken remnants of what had been a solid oak training post moments before. His adoptive father, Amphitryon, exchanged a glance with the weapons master. No ordinary drills would contain this boy's strength. Heracles had been different from birth. When Hera sent 2 serpents to kill him in his cradle, the infant had strangled them with chubby fists. Now grown, his shoulders stretched as wide as an ox yoke, his sun-browned skin criss-crossed with scars from encounters with lions and bandits. Yet for all his strength, he remained gentle until the day the madness took him. It began with whispers. Hera, who had hated Heracles since before his birth, sent a creeping fog of madness to cloud his mind. In one terrible night, he mistook his own wife Megara and their children for enemies, his massive hands turning their bodies to broken dolls before the haze lifted. Dawn revealed the horror, his tunic splattered with blood that would never wash out, his once strong hands trembling like an old man's. The oracle at Delphi spoke through choking smoke. To purify yourself, you must serve King Eurystheus for 12 years. Only through impossible trials will your sins be cleansed. Heracles bowed his head. Eurystheus was a cowardly cousin who ruled from a bronze jar, terrified of his own shadow. The tasks he'd set would be deadly. The first labor, the Nemean lion. The beast's golden fur glittered in the mountain sunlight as Heracles nocked his first arrow. The shot struck true and bounced harmlessly away. No weapon could pierce that hide. For 3 days he tracked the lion to its cave, where he stunned it with his club, before wrestling it bare-handed, his muscles straining as he slowly choked the life from it. When the deed was done, he skinned the creature using its own razor claws, the impenetrable pelt becoming his signature armor. The second labor, the Lernaean Hydra. Marsh gases swirled around Heracles' knees as he approached the creature's lair. The Hydra rose from the black waters, 9 serpentine heads hissing, the central one immortal. His sword flashed, but for every head he severed, 2 more sprouted in its place. His nephew Iolaus rushed forward with a burning torch, searing each neck stump before new heads could form. When only the immortal head remained, Heracles buried it under a boulder heavy enough to last eternity. As they departed, Hera sent a giant crab to distract them. Heracles crushed it underfoot, its remains becoming the constellation Cancer. The third labor, the Ceryneian hind. Eurystheus, unnerved by Heracles' success, demanded he capture Artemis's sacred golden-horned deer alive. For a full year, Heracles tracked the fleet-footed creature across Greece, finally snaring it in a net as it drank from a mountain stream. Artemis appeared in a blaze of moonlight, but relented when Heracles explained his penance. He carried the trembling hind to Mycenae on his shoulders, its golden hooves never touching the ground. The fourth labor, the Erymanthian boar. Winter snows crusted Heracles' beard as he drove the monstrous boar into deep drifts high on Mount Erymanthus. The beast's tusks had gouged stone, but floundering in snow, it grew exhausted. Heracles bound its legs with chains and carried the squealing creature back, presenting it to a terrified Eurystheus, who hid in his bronze storage jar. The fifth labor, the Augean stables. Clean King Augeas' cattle yards in a day, Eurystheus sneered, knowing 30 years of dung lay piled there. Instead of shovels, Heracles used rivers, diverting 2 mighty waterways to scour the filth away. When Augeas refused payment, Heracles vowed vengeance, though Eurystheus discounted the labor, claiming it didn't count as a true trial. The sixth labor, the Stymphalian birds. In a swamp choked with skeletal trees, Man-eating birds with bronze feathers watched from the branches, their droppings poisoned crops, their talons tore through armor. Athena appeared, giving Heracles a pair of bronze clappers. The deafening noise startled the flock into flight. As they darkened the sky, his arrows found their mark, the survivors fleeing never to return. The seventh labor, the Cretan bull. Poseidon's once gift to King Minos had gone mad, belching flames across Crete's countryside. Heracles wrestled the fire-breathing beast into submission, riding its back across the sea like some grotesque ship. Eurystheus, upon seeing it, ran screaming and ordered it released, where it later terrorized Marathon until another hero dealt with it. The eighth labor, the mares of Diomedes. These 4 flesh-eating stallions had devoured their own master. Heracles fed Diomedes to his horses before binding their frenzied mouths with chains. Their subsequent calm proved so remarkable that Eurystheus dedicated them to Hera, though legend says they eventually escaped to the northern wilds. The ninth labor, Hippolyta's belt. The Amazons' queen welcomed Heracles warmly, until Hera spread rumors he came to conquer. In the ensuing battle, Heracles slew Hippolyta and took her golden girdle, though the cost in Amazon lives haunted him. The 10th labor, the cattle of Geryon. At the edge of the known world, the 3-bodied giant Geryon guarded red cattle. Heracles erected 2 pillars, Gibraltar and Ceuta, to mark his journey, slew Geryon and his 2-headed hound, then drove the herd across deserts and seas, fending off thieves and monsters. The 11th labor, the apples of the Hesperides. These golden fruits grew in a garden at the world's end, guarded by a dragon and nymphs. Heracles tricked the Titan Atlas into retrieving them, temporarily shouldering the heavens himself. When Atlas tried to abandon the burden, Heracles pretended to agree, but asked for a moment to adjust his cloak, then snatched the apples and fled. The 12th labor, Cerberus. The final task was unthinkable: bring Hades' 3-headed hound from the underworld. Hermes guided him past the river Styx, where shades whispered of his coming. Hades permitted the trial if Heracles used no weapons. In the gloom of Tartarus he wrestled Cerberus into submission, dragging the whimpering beast to the surface. Eurystheus soiled himself at the sight and begged him to return it immediately. With his penance complete, Heracles stood taller, his eyes holding depths forged in suffering. But Hera's hatred wasn't spent. As he sailed home, a storm wrecked his ship, stranding him on an island where Queen Omphale would make him her slave for a year, dressing the mighty hero in women's silks as punishment for another unintended murder. Yet even this humiliation would pass. Greater adventures awaited, a wedding to the beautiful Deianira, battles against giants, and ultimately a betrayal that would send him to Mount Oeta's funeral pyre. But for now, as the sun set over Tiryns, Heracles allowed himself one rare moment of peace, unaware that his greatest suffering and his ultimate apotheosis still lay ahead. The twilight of a hero. The years following his labors should have been golden ones for Heracles. His name echoed across Greece, his deeds immortalized in song. Yet the gods are never kind to their favorites for long. After completing his 12 labors, Heracles sought to rebuild his life. He traveled to Calydon, where King Oeneus welcomed him with feasts and games. There his eyes fell upon the king's daughter, Deianira, whose beauty was matched only by her spirit. But she was promised to another, the river god Achelous, who appeared in 3 terrible forms: a serpent, a bull, and finally a man with water swirling where his legs should be. The wrestling match that followed shook the palace. Achelous transformed mid-grapple, his bull horns goring the marble floors as Heracles twisted his neck. When the river god became a serpent, Heracles crushed his ribs until he resumed human shape, then snapped off one of his horns, a prize later filled with fruits by the nymphs and transformed into the cornucopia. With Achelous defeated, Heracles claimed Deianira as his bride. Their happiness was brief. Journeying to Tiryns, they came to the Evenus River, where the centaur Nessus offered to ferry Deianira across. Halfway, the centaur's hands grew bold. Heracles, already on the far bank, loosed a hydra-poisoned arrow that struck Nessus through the back. As the centaur lay dying, he whispered to Deianira, "Take my blood. If your husband's love ever fades, anoint his robe with it, and his heart will return to you." The lie slithered into her ear like smoke. Years passed. Heracles waged wars, sacked cities, and fathered many children. Returning from one such campaign, he sent ahead a procession, including the captive Princess Iole. When Deianira saw the beautiful young woman and recognized the look in her husband's eyes, she remembered Nessus's gift. Rubbing the centaur's dried blood into a ceremonial robe, she sent it to Heracles. The moment the fabric touched his skin, the Hydra's poison ignited. Heracles tore at the robe, but it fused to his flesh, burning down to the bone. He screamed so loudly that sailors at sea thought they heard thunder. In agony, he uprooted trees to build his own funeral pyre on Mount Oeta. As the flames rose, only his young friend Philoctetes had the courage to light the fire, receiving Heracles' bow as reward. But death is never simple for a demigod. As his mortal flesh burned away, Zeus' divine essence pulled his sons skyward. On Olympus, Hera, her vengeance spent at last, allowed him to marry her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth. Below, the Heracloidae, his many sons, scattered across Greece, carrying his bloodline into legend. Yet, even as Heracles took his place among the stars, another hero's journey was beginning, one that would take him beyond the edge of the known world. In the kingdom of Iolcus, a usurper king named Peleus sat uneasily on his stolen throne, unaware that a man with one sandal was coming to claim his birthright. The voyage of the Argonauts. The kingdom of Iolcus lay restless under the rule of King Peleus, a usurper who had stolen the throne from his half-brother, Aeson. When Aeson's wife bore a son, she wept as she handed the infant to her most trusted servant. "Take him far from here," she whispered. "Name him Jason." The child grew strong under the centaur Chiron's care, learning the arts of war and healing in the mountain wilds. Years later, when Jason returned to claim his birthright, he came upon an old woman struggling to cross a raging river. Without hesitation, he carried her across, losing a sandal in the muddy current. The woman revealed herself as Hera in disguise, and from that moment, the goddess's favor followed him. Peleus, warned by an oracle to beware a man with one sandal, turned pale when Jason strode into his hall. "What would you do," the king asked carefully, "if you knew someone would overthrow you?" Jason, unaware of his true lineage, answered boldly, "I'd send him to fetch the golden fleece." The Argo set sail. The fleece hung in distant Colchis, guarded by a dragon that never slept. Jason summoned heroes from across Greece. Heracles, the strongest man alive. Orpheus, whose music could charm stones. Castor and Pollux, the divine twins. Atalanta the huntress who outran men. Peleus, father of the unborn Achilles. The shipwright Argos built them a vessel with a magical prow carved from Zeus's sacred oak, the Argo, swiftest ship ever made. As the 50 oars dipped into the waves, the people cheered, unaware they'd witnessed the last voyage where gods and mortals would adventure as equals. Isle of Women. Their first landfall was Lemnos, where only women lived. Queen Hypsipyle explained they'd murdered their husbands for taking foreign lovers. The Argonauts lingered a year, fathering children, until Heracles, disgusted by their idleness, dragged them back to sea. At the Bear Mountain, King Cyzicus welcomed them warmly, but when they sailed away, a storm drove them back to shore at night. Mistaking each other for enemies, they fought in the dark. Jason's sword pierced Cyzicus's heart before dawn revealed the tragedy. They buried the king with full honors, but the stain of innocent blood clung to their sails. The clashing rocks. Approaching the Bosporus, they found the Symplegades, twin cliffs that crashed together, crushing ships. Following Phineus's advice, they released a dove. As the rocks snapped shut behind it, they rowed with all their might. The Argo slipped through, her stern splintering as the cliffs scraped past. Never again would the rocks move. The gods had decreed the passage safe for all who followed. Fire-breathing bulls. Colchis was a land of mist and magic under King Aeetes, son of Helios. When Jason demanded the fleece, Aeetes set an impossible task. "Yoke my fire-breathing bulls, plough the field of Ares with dragon's teeth, then defeat the warriors who will rise from the soil." The gods intervened. Aphrodite made Medea, Aeetes' daughter, and a powerful witch, fall in love with Jason. Her ointment made him invincible to fire for one day. He yoked the bulls, ploughed the field, and when armed men sprang up, he threw a stone among them. They turned on each other until none remained. Still, Aeetes refused. That night, Medea led Jason to the sacred grove. Her song lulled the guardian dragon to sleep as Jason reached for the fleece, its golden glow painting his face like sunlight. They fled as Aeetes' ships gave chase. Betrayal's price. Medea had sacrificed everything. To delay her father, she murdered her brother Absyrtus, scattering his limbs in the sea. The Argonauts, horrified but complicit, sailed on. Their return route became a nightmare. They passed the sirens where Orpheus's song overpowered their lethal melody. At Crete, the bronze giant Talos nearly sank them before Medea's witchcraft felled him. Finally, after losing Heracles to a nymph's abduction and nearly starving in the Libyan desert, they reached Greece. But Jason's homecoming turned bitter. Peleus had murdered his parents in his absence. Medea tricked Peleus's daughters into cutting him apart, promising to restore his youth. When the king lay dead, the people drove them into exile. Years later, when Jason abandoned Medea for another princess, her vengeance was terrible. A poisoned gown burned his bride alive before Medea slew their own children and fled in a dragon-drawn chariot. Jason died alone, crushed beneath the rotting hulk of the Argo, the fleece's gold long since tarnished. Yet the Argonauts' legacy endured. Their voyage marked the last time gods walked openly among men before withdrawing to Olympus. The age of heroes was waning, and in the east a new threat was rising. A prince of Troy would soon ignite a war that would consume the world. The curse of Troy. The city of Troy had stood unshaken for generations, its walls built by the hands of gods. But no fortress, however strong, can withstand the unraveling of fate. It began with an apple, a golden fruit tossed carelessly among divine guests, setting in motion a chain of events that would burn the greatest city of the East to ashes. The judgment that doomed a city. On the slopes of Mount Ida, where shepherds tended their flocks, a young prince named Paris lived unaware of his royal blood. Cast out at birth after a prophecy foretold he would bring ruin to Troy, he had been raised by herdsmen, his true identity hidden even from himself. The gods, ever meddlesome in mortal affairs, chose this obscure shepherd to decide a quarrel that had split Olympus itself. 3 goddesses appeared before him in a sunlit glade, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each offering gifts in exchange for the golden apple marked "to the fairest." Hera promised empires and kingdoms to bow at his feet. Athena offered wisdom and unmatched skill in battle. But Aphrodite, with a smile that had launched 1,000 ships, whispered of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris's choice sealed Troy's fate. He gave the apple to Aphrodite, earning Hera and Athena's eternal hatred. The goddess of love kept her promise, guiding him to Sparta, where Queen Helen's beauty had already drawn kings and princes to compete for her hand. The face that launched 1,000 ships. Menelaus, Helen's husband, welcomed Paris as an honored guest, unaware of the storm gathering beneath his roof. When the Spartan king left to attend his grandfather's funeral, Paris repaid his hospitality by stealing away with Helen in the night, taking half the royal treasury with them. Some say Aphrodite's magic made Helen go willingly, others claim Paris took her by force. The result was the same: the most powerful alliance in Greece rallied to bring her back. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, and High King of Mycenae, called upon every ruler who had once sworn an oath to protect Helen's marriage. Odysseus feigned madness to avoid the war, ploughing his fields with salt until they placed his infant son before the plough. Achilles, hidden among women by his mother Thetis, was revealed when Odysseus laid weapons among women's gifts. The young warrior instinctively reached for the sword. For 9 years the Greeks besieged Troy, their ships rotting on the beaches, their men growing restless. The gods took sides. Apollo favored the Trojans, while Athena and Hera supported the Greeks. Heroes clashed in single combat beneath the city walls. Achilles, greatest of the Greek warriors, withdrew from battle after Agamemnon stole his war prize Briseis, leaving the Greeks to falter. The death of heroes. Without Achilles, the Trojans drove the Greeks back to their ships. Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion, donned his friend's armor to rally the troops, only to fall to Hector's spear. When news reached Achilles, his grief shook the camp. Donning new armor forged by Hephaestus, he returned to battle like a force of nature, slaughtering Trojans until the river Scamander ran red. The final confrontation between Achilles and Hector became legend. They circled each other 3 times around Troy's walls before Achilles drove his spear through Hector's throat. For days he dragged the prince's body behind his chariot, until King Priam came secretly by night to beg for his son's remains. In that dim tent, killer and father shared a moment of terrible understanding before the war resumed. But Achilles' glory was brief. Paris, guided by Apollo, loosed an arrow that found the hero's vulnerable heel, the only spot untouched by the Styx's waters. As the Greeks burned his body on a towering pyre, Odysseus and Ajax fought for his armor, a quarrel that would drive Ajax to madness and suicide. The trick that toppled a city. After a decade of stalemate, Odysseus conceived a plan. The Greeks built an enormous wooden horse, hiding their best warriors inside before pretending to sail away. The Trojans, believing it an offering to Athena, dragged the horse within their walls despite Cassandra's warnings, the cursed prophetess whom no one believed. That night, while Troy celebrated its supposed victory, the hidden Greeks crept out and opened the gates. What followed was not battle, but slaughter. Old King Priam died at his own altar, his grandson Astyanax was hurled from the walls, and the women, including Hector's widow Andromache and the seer Cassandra, were taken as slaves. Helen was returned to Menelaus, her beauty undimmed by the years. When he raised his sword to kill her, it fell from his hands. Whether from love or divine intervention, none could say. As dawn broke over the smouldering ruins, the gods looked down on their handiwork. The mighty walls built by Poseidon and Apollo lay in rubble. The streets ran with blood where children had once played. And on the wind came the faint sound of laughter, the laughter of the fates, who had never truly let go of the threads they spun on that distant day when Paris awarded a golden apple to the wrong goddess. But the story was not yet done. The Greeks, triumphant in war, would find the journey home more perilous than the battle itself. For the gods do not easily forgive those who violate sacred laws, and Troy's destruction had broken many. The long road home. The smoke from burning Troy still stained the sky when the Greek ships set sail for home. What should have been a triumphant return became a nightmare of storms and suffering, for the gods had grown wrathful at the sack of their sacred city. The sea, once calm beneath Poseidon's gaze, now heaved with unrest, waves crashing against the hulls like the fists of angry spirits. Odysseus, whose cunning had won the war, found his journey plagued by misfortune from the start. His fleet of 12 ships made first for Ismarus, a city of the Cicones, where his men grew greedy with plunder. They lingered too long, feasting on stolen wine while the Cicones gathered reinforcements. By dawn the beaches ran red. 6 ships were lost, and the survivors barely escaped with their lives. A storm then drove them far off course, past the known world, to the land of the lotus eaters. Here the air hung heavy with the scent of strange flowers, and those who tasted the lotus fruit forgot home entirely. Odysseus had to drag his men back to the ships, their eyes vacant, their hands still clutching the sweet, cursed fruit. Next came the island of the Cyclopes, where a cave mouth yawned dark against the cliffs. Inside they found cheeses and milk, but the owner soon returned. Polyphemus, a giant with a single eye in the middle of his forehead. He sealed the cave with a boulder no 20 men could move, and began devouring Odysseus's crew 2 at a time. The survivors plotted their escape. They sharpened a wooden stake, hardened its tip in the fire, and when the Cyclops slept, drove it into his eye. Blinded and roaring, Polyphemus rolled aside the boulder to call for help, and the Greeks slipped out clinging to the bellies of his sheep. But as their ship pulled away, Odysseus, always proud, shouted his true name. The Cyclops, son of Poseidon, prayed to his father for vengeance, and the sea god would not forget. The winds carried them next to Aeolia, where King Aeolus ruled the winds themselves. He gifted Odysseus a leather bag containing all storm winds, leaving only the west wind free to guide them home. For 9 days they sailed within sight of Ithaca's shores, but on the 10th, while Odysseus slept, his men, thinking the bag held treasure, loosed the winds. The resulting hurricane blew them back to Aeolia, where the king refused to help them again. Then came the Laestrygonians, giants who hurled boulders from the cliffs, smashing 11 of the 12 ships. Only Odysseus's vessel escaped, limping to the island of Circe, where smoke curled from the halls of the enchantress. She turned half his crew into swine, but with Hermes' aid, Odysseus resisted her magic. For a year they remained as her guests, feasting and resting until his men grew restless. Circe warned them of the horrors ahead, the sirens, whose song lured sailors to their deaths, Scylla, the 6-headed monster who snatched men from passing ships, and Charybdis, the whirlpool that swallowed the sea 3 times a day. They passed the sirens only because Odysseus had his crew lash him to the mast, their ears stuffed with wax. But Scylla took 6 men as they sailed through the narrow strait, their screams echoing as the monster devoured them alive. Then came Thrinacia, island of the sun god Helios, where his sacred cattle grazed. Though Odysseus warned his men not to touch them, hunger drove them to slaughter the beasts while he slept. The punishment was swift. A storm wrecked their ship, and all but Odysseus drowned. For 9 days he clung to the wreckage before washing ashore on Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso kept him as her lover for 7 years. She offered him immortality if he stayed, but he wept daily for home. At last the gods intervened, and she released him on a makeshift raft. Poseidon, still furious, sent one final storm, smashing the raft to splinters. Half drowned, he crawled onto the shores of Scheria, land of the Phaeacians. There the Princess Nausicaa found him and led him to her father's court. Moved by his tale, they gave him a ship and sent him home at last. 20 years after he had left, Odysseus awoke on the shores of Ithaca, disguised as a beggar by Athena. His palace was overrun with suitors vying for his wife Penelope's hand, eating his food and drinking his wine. Only his old dog Argos recognized him, wagging his tail once before dying in peace. Penelope, faithful but desperate, had stalled the suitors by unraveling her weaving each night. A shroud for Odysseus's father, she vowed to finish before remarrying. Now, out of tricks, she set a final test. Whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads would win her. None could even bend the bow until the beggar stepped forward. The moment Odysseus's fingers closed around the bow's familiar curve, the years fell away. He strung it effortlessly, then turned it on the suitors. With his son Telemachus and 2 loyal servants, he slaughtered every last one, reclaiming his home in a rain of arrows and blood. Penelope, still wary, tested him one last time, mentioning their marriage bed, which Odysseus himself had carved from a living olive tree. When he described its construction perfectly, she wept and embraced him at last. But the sea was not yet done with him. Tiresias had prophesied one final journey, to carry an oar so far inland that men would mistake it for a winnowing fan, there to make peace with Poseidon at last. Yet even as Odysseus set his affairs in order, another king's homecoming was ending in bloodshed. Agamemnon, returning victorious from Troy, would find his wife's welcome far deadlier than any battlefield. The blood of kings, the fires, still burned in Troy's ruins when Agamemnon's fleet set sail for Mycenae. 10 years of war had hardened the High King, but no battle could prepare him for what waited at home. His wife, Clytemnestra, had spent a decade nursing her rage over the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, rage over his open affair with the Trojan princess Cassandra. When watchmen spotted the king's sails on the horizon, the queen hid her fury behind a smile and prepared a bath to wash the war from her husband's skin. The water steamed as Agamemnon lowered himself into the bronze tub, sighing at the first touch of warmth since leaving Troy. He didn't see Clytemnestra lift the heavy fishing net until it settled over him, tangling his limbs. Aegisthus, his cousin and Clytemnestra's lover, struck first with the dagger. The king thrashed as his wife raised the same ritual axe that had taken Iphigenia's life years before. "This is for our daughter," she whispered, before the blade fell. Cassandra died next, cut down in the palace courtyard, before she could scream. Far from Mycenae, in the forests of Phocis, a boy trained with sword and spear. Orestes, Agamemnon's exiled son, had grown into a man under his uncle's protection. When the news of his father's murder reached him, the Delphic oracle left no room for doubt. Avenge your father, or face the gods' wrath. With his sister Electra's help, he returned to Mycenae disguised as a traveller, bringing news of his own death. The palace had grown decadent in his absence. Aegisthus sprawled on his father's throne, Clytemnestra's laughter echoing through halls that once rang with war councils. When Orestes struck Aegisthus down, his mother came running, her hair loose, her eyes wild. She bared her breast to him. "Would you kill the womb that carried you?" For a heartbeat, Orestes hesitated. Then Apollo's voice roared in his mind, and his sword found its mark. No sooner had Clytemnestra's body hit the floor than the air grew thick with the scent of rotting earth. The Erinyes rose from the shadows, ancient spirits of vengeance with snakes for hair and blood dripping from their eyes. They hounded Orestes across Greece, their shrieks driving him to madness. Even Apollo could not protect him from their wrath. At last, Orestes collapsed before Athena's altar in Athens. The goddess convened the first murder trial with mortal jurors to weigh his fate. Apollo spoke in his defense. A mother is but the vessel, the seed comes from the father. The Erinyes hissed back, "Blood demands blood." When the votes were tied, Athena cast the deciding ballot for mercy. To appease the spirits, she gave them a new name, the Eumenides, kindly ones, and a shrine beneath the Acropolis. The curse of the house of Atreus was broken at last. While Orestes found peace, Menelaus's journey home proved stranger still. Storms blew his ships off course to Egypt, where he wandered 7 years before finding Helen, or at least a phantom of her. Some claim the real Helen had waited in Egypt all along, while a doppelganger caused the war in Troy. Regardless, when they finally returned to Sparta, their marriage was a hollow thing. Menelaus grew fat on feasts, while Helen moved through the palace like a ghost, her beauty untouched by time. The gods granted them an odd mercy. Instead of dying, they were taken to the Elysian fields, where spring never fades. Of the other kings, few found happy ends. Diomedes returned to find his wife unfaithful and his throne stolen. He sailed west, founding cities in Italy where they worshipped him as a god. Ajax the Lesser, who had dragged Cassandra from Athena's altar, drowned when the goddess smashed his ship upon the rocks. Only Nestor, the aged king of Pylos, came home to peace, his wisdom guiding a new generation. Yet, even as the Trojan War's survivors faded into legend, a new story was beginning, one that would outlast them all. In a sculptor's workshop on Cyprus, a man named Pygmalion chiseled at a block of ivory, his mallet strokes growing softer as the face beneath his hands grew more beautiful. He didn't yet know that his creation would draw Aphrodite's eye, or that the gods had one final miracle left to grant before withdrawing from the world of men. The last miracles. The world had grown older since the gods first walked openly among men. The great heroes were gone, some fallen in battle, others faded into legend. The halls of Olympus grew quieter as the gods turned their attention elsewhere, leaving mortals to shape their own destinies. Yet before the final veil fell between heaven and earth, there would be a few last wonders, tender and terrible in equal measure. In Cyprus, the sculptor Pygmalion worked alone in his sunlit workshop, his chisel coaxing life from ivory. Years of watching the flaws of mortal women had left him disillusioned, and so he poured his longing into his art, creating a statue so perfect it ached. He draped her in silks, whispered secrets to her still form, and at night lay his cloak over her shoulders as if to ward off chill. During the festival of Aphrodite, he knelt before the goddess's altar with an uncharacteristic prayer. Let me find one like her, of living flesh. The goddess, amused and perhaps moved by such devotion, sent her answer not in dreams or omens, but in warmth. When Pygmalion returned home and touched the statue's hand, the ivory yielded beneath his fingers like skin. Colour bloomed in her cheeks, her chest rose with breath, and Galatea, she who is milk-white, stepped down from her pedestal into her sculptor's trembling arms. Their son Paphos would give his name to Aphrodite's sacred city, a final love story written as the age of miracles waned. Not all endings were so kind. In Thrace, Orpheus wandered the forests where once his music had made trees uproot themselves to follow him. Since emerging from the underworld empty-handed, his songs carried only grief. He had gone to reclaim Eurydice, his bride, taken by a viper's bite, and Hades himself had been moved to mercy. "Take her back," the god said, "but do not look behind you until you reach the light." Orpheus had almost succeeded. At the last moment, doubt had slithered into his heart. Was she truly there? Had the gods tricked him? A single glance over his shoulder, and she vanished, her fingertips brushing his cloak for the last time as the darkness reclaimed her. Now his lyre played, only dirges. The Maenads, wild followers of Dionysus, found him thus, a shadow of the man who had once charmed the lords of death. When he ignored their frenzied dancing, they tore him apart in their rage, casting his head into the river Hebros. But the gods could not bear to let such music die. As his severed head floated downstream, it sang still, the lips forming words until the sea claimed it. His lyre they placed among the stars, where it gleams beside the hero it honors. Of all the gods, only Prometheus remained truly among mortals. Freed at last from his mountain torment by Heracles, the Titan walked the earth in those fading days, watching as the spark he'd stolen for mankind kindled into something unexpected. Cities rose where monsters had once prowled. Laws were carved in stone where oracles had once spoken. One evening, as he sat by a campfire with travelers, an old man asked him why the gods were disappearing. "They are not disappearing," Prometheus said, poking the embers with a stick. "They are becoming what you will make of them." In Delphi, the Pythia gave her final prophecy as the sacred vapors thinned. No more will Apollo speak through laurel leaves. The nymphs depart the streams, the dryads sleep. But remember us, not as masters, but as mirrors. Your virtues and follies were always your own. The tripod toppled, the sacred spring fell silent, and on a forgotten mountainside a grotto's mouth crumbled shut as a voice whispered, "The great Pan is dead," though some claimed it was only the wind. The fates snipped their last threads. Helen vanished from Sparta, taken to the Elysian fields, where time does not touch beauty. Odysseus, old and weary, walked inland until a farmer mistook his oar for a winnowing fan, fulfilling Tiresias' prophecy. There he made peace with Poseidon at last, before closing his eyes one final time. Aeneas, who had fled burning Troy with his father on his back, founded a new kingdom far to the west, Rome, where gods would wear different names, but their stories would endure. And so the world turned. The Olympians became statues, then stories, then constellations in the night sky. But on certain evenings when the light falls golden through the trees, one might almost catch a familiar presence. Hermes' laughter in a sudden breeze, Artemis's touch in the cool of moonlight, or perhaps just the echo of stories told by firelight, keeping the old gods alive in the only way that truly lasts. And so, the age when gods walked among mortals faded like the last light of sunset. The great halls of Olympus grew quiet, their golden doors closing softly on an era of wonders and terrors alike. The heroes, some noble, some tragic, passed into song. The monsters became shadows in the corners of old tales, and the gods, who once shaped the world with thunderbolts and whispers, now live only in the stories we tell. But perhaps that was always their true power, not in ruling over mortals, but in living forever in our imaginations. When we see the flash of lightning, we remember Zeus. When the sea grows restless, we think of Poseidon. And when love strikes like an arrow, we smile at the mischief of Aphrodite. The myths end here, but the telling never truly stops. As long as there are firesides and curious listeners, these stories will live on, not as lessons from the past, but as mirrors for who we are and who we might yet become. So close your eyes now and dream of golden fleeces, of winged sandals, of cities both glorious and fallen. For in dreams the gods still speak, the heroes still rise, and the magic is real, if only for a night. The end, or perhaps just another beginning.